Welcome back, everybody. This is Grace or Gibby, whatever you prefer, and today I am making a Darkovia subrace guide because a lot of people seem to want to know why should I choose this subrace, what's better about this one than another one, and I just thought I'd make a video going through all three of the subrace's mechanics and what makes them good for different builds, what makes them bad for different builds, and what their trade-offs are, because a lot of them you can use for multiple builds. Now, I say three, and an astute observer will notice that there are four. There's Darkovia, Werewolf, Vampire, and Werepyre, but Darkovia is not updated. It maxed out at like level 90 or level 100, so it's not really useful for the late game unless you want to do something weird and different. So I'm just going to be sticking with the main three: Werepyre, Vampire, and Werewolf. Werepyre, Vampire, Werewolf. Yes, okay. So I'm going to start off with the armors. Now I have this account set to Vampire and I'm going to be changing it back and forth throughout the video. You're not going to see that part, obviously. But I want to show the armors that Werepyre gets access to. All of this stuff, the spells, they're okay. They're not great. They just do damage. Nothing really go crazy about. Same with the weapons. They're okay. They're not great. Nothing to go crazy about. What is great, though, is the armors, because each one is a compression armor for 2 elements. So normal Werepyre, advanced Werepyre, and this is what you get as your no drop if you're a guardian, compresses earth and darkness and is weak to fire and light. Golden Horror Vampire, Werepyre, compresses wind and light and is weak to dark and ice. Malicious Devil compresses fire and energy and is weak to light and ice. And Heartless Beast, Werepyre compresses water and ice and is weak to fire and dark. Now, Werepyre is the only subrace of the three that all of its compression is, first of all, available for every element, and second of all, is all gold cost. For Vampire and Werewolf, some of the armors are Z-token cost. Well, one of the armors for each 2 elements is Z-token cost. So to get full coverage for Vampire and Werewolf, you need tokens, but for Werepyre, you can do it with all gold, which is 1 pro for like free-to-play players. Now I'm going to show you the armor, and I'm not going to be like abusing the armors to their max potential. I'm not going to be like making a setup to get like 5,000 damage or to get like a super strong status or anything like that. I'm just going to show you what they do, how they do it, and explain what kind of good strategies you can use. So if you're looking for like a highlight reel, not really going to show that, but if you're just looking to know what does the armor do, why is it good situationally, that's what I'm here for. So we have 10 skills. But before I get into the skills, I need to explain hybrid stats. Now, hybrid stats refer to strength and intellect. And the reason they're called hybrid stats is because before the stat revamp, if you were going to be a hybrid, you needed strength, int, and dex. But Werepyre tried to solve that by making you only need strength and int. But the long story short is that this Force of the Night toggle makes it so when you're using melee and magic weapons, you can make them use both your strength and intellect stats for damage instead of just your strength or your int. So this can be good or it can be bad. In my account for a mage, for example, I only have intellect, so I wouldn't want to use this toggle to use hybrid stats for my attacks. But if you're a hybrid, if you have strength and intellect, you can use this, and it will boost your damage a little bit because of like a variety of reasons. One, you get more stats from this. You get 70 stats from your stat boosting toggle because it's 35 for strength and 35 for intellect. Look, it's off. I have 250 and 0. Now I have 285 and 35. So using hybrid stats, if you have the hybrid stats, will generally boost your damage. The issue is that because Werepyre uses hybrid stats, it's a little bit worse for people who only have intellect. And there's some nuance to this, and I'll get into it. But in short, there are several abilities that scale off both strength and intellect. So if you use them and you only have one or the other, and you can really only do it if you only have intellect, and not if you only have strength, and all because there's mana costs. So you can't be a just strength Werepyre. You can be a just intellect Werepyre, But if you're just strength, you won't be able to really cast any of the abilities. But, as I was saying, if you only have intellect, you'll be losing out on about 25% of the damage or effect from those stats, because 50% of the damage is base, and 50% comes from the stats. So since you only have intellect and not strength, you only have half the stats, so 25% of the effect of the skill is gone if you just have intellect. So, just to summarize hybrid stats, you use both strength and int. You can toggle it on or off for basic attacks, but you can't toggle it on or off for several of the skills. And it's good if you have both stats, and it's bad if you only have one stat. Now, I'm going to get into some of the passive abilities. So one, we have Unstoppable. Now, Unstoppable, it does what it sounds like. If you get stunned for any reason by any mechanism, you'll get unstunned by your Unstoppable. The first time it happens in a battle, it's free, and after that, it costs as much as a skill, so like 392 SP. So it's good. A lot of bosses will stun you, so it's great. A lot of bosses won't stun you, so it's useless in some situations. It's very nice to have. You can do some cool things with it. Some bosses will stun lock you. This obviously prevents that, which is really good. Next is one of the other toggles that is a passive toggle is called Bloodlust. And what this does is it trades a little bit of your HP for a little bit of your MP and SP every turn. So every turn, I'll lose a little bit of HP and gain some SP and MP back. Now the amounts you gain are like less than 100, so it's not a huge amount. But if you're in a 5-turn fight, you can gain like a lot of mana and a lot of SP back just for some cheap health costs. So it's significant. You do feel it. You do feel a boost, and you're able to like maintain your miss costs more easily. You're able to maintain your guest costs more easily, stuff like that. It's not an amazing skill, but it's very nice. It's very convenient. Next, I already showed this, but Deadly Predator is the name of the stat toggle. All of the subraces have stat toggles. Werepyre only has one, while Vampire and Werewolf have two. But this one gives you 2 stats. And it gives you 35 of 2 stats, because if it gave you 50 of 2 stats, it would be like too strong or whatever and cost too much. So it's a good toggle. Very useful because, again, you're using hybrid stats, so you get bonus from both of them. So it's good. Good ability, pretty basic. It's on a lot of armors these days. All the tier 3 armors, all the Subrace armors, all have a stat drive. Now, Invigorating Rage is basically you heal 5% of the damage you deal from pretty much every source. So 5% of the damage you deal, not a lot, but it does add up over time. Sort of like Bloodlust. You'll notice it in a longer fight that you have a bit more health, a bit more resources at the end of the fight. And this final toggle is the Become the Beast toggle. This puts you into like your super strong subrace form, and I'm going to wait to talk about it until the end of the Werepyre discussion, because there's some nuance to it with the hybrid stats. Okay, so one really good skill that Werepyre has, and I'm just going to use it, is the Claw attack. Now, as you can see, it inflicts a power 1 bleed on your opponent, and that is quite simply a lot of damage. Bleed is a good status. It's not amazing as a status because it's easy for the monster to resist it relative to other statuses because it gets a save every turn. But if you use some potence, if you use some sources to make your bleed more likely to inflict and stay inflicted, it can be really strong. Bleed is also great for Necromancer, and since you have intellect, you'll probably be using Necromancer. So your Bleed Eater combined with your Werewolf Bleed, your Necromancer's Bleed Eater combined with your Werewolf Bleed, it's a very strong tactic. You can use it very well. So Superior Claw is great. It's a weapon-based skill, so if you use something like Haunted Dragon Lord's weapon, you can gain mana or SP back with the hit. If you use something like a Bloodblade, it'll do a little more damage. If you use something like a status weapon, like Terminus Twin Maul, you can paralyze them and bleed them in the same attack. So it's very strong. It's a very good ability. The only bad thing is that it does get half of its stat bonus from strength and half of it from intellect. And it doesn't matter what you have this toggle set to. The skill, Superior Claw, always has the hybrid stats. You can't turn it off. So if you're a mage like me, you'll be missing out on 25% of your accuracy and damage because again, half comes from base and half comes from stats. And in Werepyres, the hybrid stats are each half strength and int, so you lose on a quarter overall. That's not a deal breaker for using the skill as a mage. And as I'll get into, if you're a ranger, you can still use the skill just fine. I'll get into the ranger part when I talk about the Become the Beast toggle. But it is something you should be aware of. If you just have intellect and you're using a magic weapon, this attack will be weaker than most attacks. So the next easiest one to talk about is Terror, and Terror is pretty simple. I'll just show it to you. It's a quick cast skill that reduces your opponent's ability to do damage. It panics them. So Panic is a lot like Choke, but it's also a lot like Bleed in that the monster gets a save to remove the panic every turn. So against a monster of your own level, Combat Practice Trainer is probably never going to resist the panic because it's so low level. But against the higher level monster, it's pretty easy for them to remove the panic. So this makes it not that great for defensive purposes, and of course, you can make a setup designed to have the highest chance of panic working and have really strong panic, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's really doesn't have too much defensive item support. However, what panic does have is offensive item support. There's the infamous Fey water pet, which eats panic to heal you a lot. That's a really strong pet, and it's a really good way to eat panic and get a good effect out of it. So I might spend 131 mana and 98 SP, as you can see, on this skill. But when my Fey pet eats the panic, it'll heal me more than that. That's the gist of it. That's the gist of the strategy. Makes it a really good strategy if you have charisma. That being said, it's really only good for offense and for eating purposes right now, unless it gets changed in the future, the panic status. There's also a weapon that you can eat panic with to get hyper crit, and then I think there's one or two other panic eaters. They're pretty good. It's a good option to have. It also doesn't have a negative save, unlike both the werewolf and the vampire quick cast status ability, so that's a big plus it has over those two subraces. Wolfbat Swarm is a really good guest. So you can click in order to have your guests drain your foe's spirit, or you can have it lower your foe's blocking and elemental defenses. Now what those mean is that one mode it has deals damage to your enemy and then heals your SP by a third of a skill cost, so it heals like 130 SP. And that's the spirit draining mode, which, just to say, is really good. More SP sustain is really good, especially for adventurers. Well, I think adventurers can't use this skill. But SP sustain is always really good. Essence Orb is great. Having more SP sustain built into your kit is really good. And if you have all 4 Werepyre elements, armors, you can get these pets to LE seek between all 8 elements. So it's really strong that they're able to do that. And when I say the pets can LE seek between all 8 elements, your other skills also LE seek between all 8 elements, depending on what armor you're in. So the base one seeks between earth and dark, because those are its 2 elements. The malicious devil seeks between fire and energy, etc. And so the superior claw seeks between earth and dark. The pets seek between earth and dark, and they default to earth if the resistances are the same. And then the dual fangs also seek between earth and dark, and I'll talk about dual fangs in a minute. But that's it for the Wolfbat. Oh, no, I forgot to talk about the defense loss and elevuln effect. So if you toggle them into the other mode, as you can see, defense loss and element vulnerability for darkness and earth. So they only work for the elements you're attacking in, but you get 25 bonus damage and you have a higher chance to hit. So that's a very strong status. It's very useful. It's just really good. Elevuln is really good. Defense loss, not that great, but because the elevuln is so good, the guest is still very good. And again, you can have it for all 8 elements because they come in 4 elemental versions for the 4 armors. Lunar Vigor is a healing spell, and it scales off your intellect and your strength. So again, if you only have one, then you'll get 75% effectiveness instead of 100%, because 25% of the stats you don't have if you only have one or the other. But it it is a very strong healing spell because it doesn't have an always useful penalty like most healing spells do. So that makes it great. It makes it really strong to use. Um, and you can use it in an element appropriate armor because the Werepyre Subrace covers all 8 elements. So no matter what element monster you're fighting against, you can use a good healing spell and still be defended against the monster that's attacking you. There's really not much to say. This is a great healing spell. It's very good. It's very efficient because it splits the cost between your mana and your SP, which is very useful practically. It's just great. This is a really good healing spell, and it's not to be slept on when you're considering the power of the Subrace. Dual Fangs is simply a skill. It's not weapon-based, and it does a lot of ele comp, and its element seeks between Earth and Dark for the base form and all the other elements. You might be thinking, well, don't Vampire and Werewolf also have a skill that element seeks and has ele comp at level 9? Yes, they do. However, the Werewolf skill has much higher ele comp, so it does, the Werepyre skill has higher ele comp, so it does higher damage. Now, it is also forced to scale off of hybrid stats. So if you're like me and you're a mage and you only have intellect and not strength, you'll lose about 25% of your damage and accuracy for the same reason we discussed previously. Okay, so we're finally getting into the big one, the Become the Beast toggle. All the Darkovian subraces have this Become the Beast toggle. Werepyre's is pretty similar to the other two. Each of them have their own little quirks. Werewolf's does pure damage for any stat line. Vampire does a little bit less damage, but heals you for that lack of damage. And Werepyre makes you scale off of strength and intellect for melee or magic weapons. So as a mage, and I've said this so many times, I just want to make it clear, if you only have intellect, you'll only get 75% effectiveness out of this ability. That being said, the cost is split between your mana and your SP, which is really good. It makes it more easier to sustain. It means you can have it out for longer without completely draining your mana bar or your SP bar. It's very, very strong. Also, the damage is a little bit higher if you do have intellect and strength. If you don't have intellect and strength, the damage is a little bit lower. This goes for the basic attacks, the skill attacks, and the spell damage. If you have strength and int, it's higher than the other two subraces. If you only have one, it's lower than the other two subraces. So, if you're running hybrid stats, strength and int together, you definitely want to use this because you'll get higher damage, higher impact, higher effect out of all your skills. If you're only running intellect, it's good. It has a lot of good stuff. But some of the skills, like the damage skill, the bleed skill, and the heal skill, you'll get less usefulness out of them compared to if you had both stats. Does that mean you shouldn't use it if you're just running intellect? Maybe, maybe not. You have to consider what you value and whether you value that loss in accuracy and damage low enough to make up for the effects that Werepyre has that are really good. So it's a trade-off. Now, I've only been talking about strength and int this whole time. You might be thinking, what happens with rangers? And that's a great question, and it's a very important question because rangers ignore hybrid stats. Hybrid stats only affect you if you're using a melee weapon or a magic weapon. If you're using a ranged weapon and you use Superior Claw, it only scales off dexterity. If you're using a ranged weapon and you use Dual Fangs, it only scales off dexterity. So you might be thinking, rangers get the most damage from Werepyre. How does that make sense if it is a hybrid class meant for mage fighter hybrids? I don't know how it makes sense, but it's very strong. Rangers can get the full damage boost from the Become the Beast toggle, the Dual Fangs, and the Superior Claw ability. The only issue is all of these things also have mana costs. So look, 261 mana for the heal, 261 mana for the Dual Fangs ele seeking nuke, and 100 mana for the Superior Claw. And it's 200 mana, 260 mana every turn for the Become the Beast toggle. So, rangers, pure rangers with no intellect, can't really use Werepyre. That being said, if you're a Werepyre, if you're a player who has dexterity and intellect, you can get all the damage of Werepyre with your ranged weapons, all of the ability costs that are efficient because they use both mana and SP, so it's split between your two resource bars. You can get all of the benefit from those, all of the damage from the Werepyre boosts, without needing strength. So rangers that can use Werepyre, because they also have intellect, are very, very strong. So I'm going to go over a quick summary. Werepyre is a subrace that is meant for strength intellect hybrids. It can be used by people with just intellect. It cannot be used by people with just strength, and it can be used really well by people with dexterity and intellect, because the dexterity bypasses the hybrid stats requirement. If you have hybrid stats, or if you use dexterity and intellect, you get all of the benefits from Werepyre, and these damage benefits come out to higher than the werewolf or the vampire form. If you only have intellect, the damage effects from Werepyre are lower than werewolf or vampire, but the utility and the guest summon and the panic and the healing spell are debatably better than a lot of the stuff that the other classes offer. You have really good sustain in terms of your passive HP to SP and mana conversion, in terms of your 5% healing, and in terms of your good healing spell. You're able to become immune to CC with your unstoppable passive, and you have a really good bleed skill that you can use just to do damage or to use with Necromancer to eat bleeds. Werepyre is great. It's great if you have strength and int, it's great if you just have int, and it's really great if you have int and dexterity. That's pretty much it for Werepyre. In the next part of the video, I'm going to go into Vampire and Werewolf. Let me know what you think, and let me know any questions you have. So the next Darkovia subrace I'm going to be talking about today is the Werewolf subrace. Now, Werewolf and Vampire were updated at around the same time, and Werepyre was updated later. So Werepyre is a little more complicated. So the Werewolf section and the Vampire section are going to be probably much quicker. These weapons, not too great. They do bonus damage to vampires. That's pretty much it. You could use them for a Saphira fight, maybe. I wouldn't recommend it. The Bright Wolf is a anti-vampire pet. Again, wouldn't really recommend it. The main reason that I'm showing you the shop is the armors. Now, the advanced werewolf, is the no-drop version of the armor, so it defends against earth and light. Note the compression is a little bit different from Werepyre. Instead of being 40-40 resistances at level 150, it's 39-42. So the base element is a little bit stronger than the secondary element. It's basically the same. Rage Beast, it defends against wind and fire. Predator of the Night defends against dark and energy. And White Howler defends against ice and earth. Now you'll notice that none of those defend against water. And that is because the Golden Fang, which is a Z token option, defends against light and water. So you're thinking they have 5 werewolf armors, which means 10 elements are covered, but earth and light, I believe, are covered twice. So earth is covered in the base element and White Howler, and light is covered in the base element and Golden Fang. So that's why the only water protection is in Golden Fang. So you can't use a free-to-play Werepyre armor as water defense. It's just something to consider. Just something you should be aware of in case you want to use Werepyre to fill up your water slot, or Werewolf to fill up your water slot. I'm probably going to mix up the names of the subraces a lot because I've been talking about them for the last little bit. If I'm in this section and I say something that's not werewolf, I mean werewolf. Now I'm going to show you the skills, and I'm going to go through some of Werewolf's more boring skills first, just because I can get through them very quickly. So, werewolves passively do more damage against vampires. It's 10% more damage. and this includes your pets and guests. So it's nice. Lycan Healing is the first passive. This heals you a tiny bit of HP at the end of every turn. It's next to nothing. Not very good. Lycan Reflexes is a toggle which boosts your dexterity, simple damage, and accuracy bonus for rangers or people using ranged weapons. Lycan Strength is the same but for strength. So simple damage and accuracy bonus for warriors, people using melee weapons. Lycan Vigor, it gives you 20 more SP per turn passively at level 150. At lower levels, it's like 5 SP per turn. At higher levels, it's 19.8, so it averages out to 20 per turn. It's not nothing, it's pretty weak. Now I'm going to explain the two worst abilities first, just to get them out of the way. Call Pack brings you a guest. Now it is the werewolf guest. I'll let you take a look at him. Frankly speaking, this guy is pure ass. He does a Defloss effect. It's not even a good defense loss effect. Like this, he only attacks with one element. He doesn't element seek like the Werepyre guests. This guy's pure ass. I would pretty much never use him. Trash ability is what I'm telling you. Trash ability. Healing Howl. It's an endurance-based healing spell. So it can be good. It comes in an armor that you can use against every element because you can buy all the armors and be defended against every element. That being said, it's not as good as the Werepyre heal because the Werepyre heal doesn't have an always useful penalty. This one does. And the Vampire heal, I'll get into Vampire heal later, but this one is just a boring heal. The Vampire heal at least has something cool going on. So that's pretty much all the terrible abilities out of the way, which you'll notice was like 6 abilities that don't really do too much. Werewolf is a good subrace. It has a lot of things about it that aren't good. One of the hidden gems of Werewolf, and when I say hidden, I don't really mean hidden, everybody knows about it, is the Snarl ability. So you can use it twice per turn, and it gives a 40% chance of not acting for 3 turns as a fear. Now, quick note, this fear is at a plus 20 save, which means the monster gets plus 20 to resist the fear. That being said, it's quick cast, so you can equip a potency misc, a potency shield, you can equip a potency guest as well. I think the only potency guest or pet we have is, well, for fear at least, is that one wind dragon, Spotter Drake. But since it's quick cast, you can equip lots of potency and somewhat negate the issue of the plus 20 save. That being said, the plus 20 save kind of sucks, but it is a quick cast applicable fear, which is really good. Now, that being said, it's really good in theory. If you're up against a boss with freedom, you will never be able to inflict the fear because they're immune to it. So you can't use it for fear eating against bosses. Another good ability is Wolf Fangs. Now, it costs less SP for melee and ranged, costs more SP for mages. It just costs a normal skill amount. But what it does, it inflicts a power 1 bleed. And actually, he resisted the bleed on his first turn. That's surprising, because he's so much lower level. That's okay, though. Not really a big deal. It inflicts a power 1 bleed, just like Werepyre. The thing that makes it worse than Werepyre is it doesn't element seek. It only attacks in the base element of the armor. And it costs a lot more resources. The Werepyre version is efficient. This version is not. That being said, it's still a good source of bleed. Power 1 bleed is nothing to scoff at. And you might be thinking, Werewolf has a really good fear and a pretty good bleed. This makes it good for Necromancer, because Necromancer can eat both fear and bleed and gets bonuses from fear and bleed. This is true. Werewolf can set up for Necromancer very well if you choose to use it that way. That's pretty much its greatest strength, setting up for Necromancer. So ironically, the subrace that is meant for rangers and warriors is debatably the best for mages because it can set up really well. Oh, also I showed you the wrong skill. The Wolf Claw is the one that inflicts bleed. The Wolf, let me find the two names. So Wolf Claws versus Wolf Fangs. Wolf Fangs deal a lot of damage. Wolf Claws inflicts the bleed. Wolf Fangs is a damage skill and has weaker damage than the Werepyre skill because it has lower LE comp. Pure damage skill versus pure bleed skill that does very little damage. Both of them are okay. The bleed one is nice, but it is more expensive than the Werepyre version. The last thing to really go over is the Become the Beast toggle. And this is the same as all the Become the Beast toggles. It has a 4-hit attack, but what makes it different from the other two is, one, it works for any stat line. You don't need specifically strength and intellect to use it, like Werepyre does. And two, it does more damage than Vampire. It does less damage than a perfectly statted out Werepyre, but it does more damage than an incorrectly statted out Werepyre. So it's good if you're a generalist, if you only have one main stat, or sorry, if you're a specialist, if you only have one main stat, it does better pure damage. But if you're using something like Werepyre or you want the healing from Vampire, it's worse. There's no special stuff about the beast form. It is simply pure damage that is less situational than Werepyre. That's pretty much it for Werewolf. When I say its only redeeming qualities are the fact that it can stack bleed and fear for necromancer usage, that's really it. It's not a great subrace aside from that. I wouldn't use it unless I didn't want to run intellect and was a ranger or was just a pure warrior. Because it has the strength drive and the dex drive, and it does pure damage with its beast form. So it's okay for a pure warrior or a pure ranger. But if you run intellect, I would have trouble using this over Werepyre. Unless you want to use fear eating or bleed eating, in which case this is good because it has both fear and bleed together, while Werepyre only has bleed. So that's pretty much it for Werewolf. And next I'm going to move on to Vampire. So for the final Darkovia subrace, we're going to be looking at Vampire. Now, Vampire is classically the mage subrace because it has charisma stat bonuses and intellect stat bonuses, and its level 9 ability, which is like the nuke ability in these three subraces, is classified as a spell. Before we get into all that, these weapons, they're pretty ass. Don't bother with them. As for the armors, though, like Werewolf, they're 39 and 42 element compression. The advanced vamp and the no drop version, these are the same. They compress dark and wind. Blue blood compresses water and light. Psionic vampire compresses energy and darkness. And Chthonian count, like the Cthulhu, I guess. I don't know. Oh, the colors look a little bit off. Oh no, I guess not. Anyways, as I was saying, the Chthonian count compresses earth and ice. You might have noticed this leaves out fire. The only fire armor for Vampire is the token option. It also defends against water. Yes, you can cover every element but fire with just gold cost armors, which I think is really just fine because there are lots of good free-to-play fire armors. For water, it's a bit more of an issue because there aren't many great free-to-play water armors. There are enough, though, so that's what I'm saying. For water, it's more of an issue. What I mean is that's kind of a downside of Werewolf, because if you're not going to use Archmage Apprentice or Kindred, there's not too much good water stuff. But either way, we're talking about Vampire right now. So I'm just going to get right into the skills. Let me unsummon all my guests and pets real quick. There we go. You can see how I was speedrunning the cure to get to this quest. But so vampires do extra damage to werewolves. And one thing they have that is unique is all three subraces have like a bleed thing. But vampire's bleed thing is a toggle which does a slight bleed off of any action you take, whether it's attacking, spells, or whatnot. It does weak bleed. And then you heal a quarter of the damage that the enemy takes from any bleed. So even if I apply a bleed in a different armor or use a spell to apply a bleed, I still heal from that bleed. Those are technically two separate abilities. The bleed healing is a level 2 ability, and the bloodletting is a level 1 ability, but I grouped them together. The slight bleed costs some SP to manage, costs 78 at level 150, but it's still quite good. I think this is one of the better parts of Vampire, just casually having a little extra damage, having a little extra status effect. Now the next, I'm going to go over the two status boosters. Not status boosters, stat boosters. The Alluring Charisma, the Alluring Presence Charisma boost, and I believe the Ancient Wisdom Intellect boost. Now you'll notice both of these actually cost mana to upkeep, which can be nice. If you have a lot of mana and you're running out of SP, you know you can manage your resources a little better. So that's a nice pro of the two abilities. One ability that people really like is Mesmerize. Now Mesmerize is a control skill, so it has an 100% chance to control, or if you inflict it, it has a 100% chance of striking the self instead of the other person. So you stun them for one turn, they take a tiny bit of harm damage. Now, there are two bad things about Mesmerize. One, it has a rounding issue where it's a little bit stronger than 100%. It's like 105%. So every couple times that you cast this spell, instead you get a 75% control for 2 turns instead of 100% for 1 turn. So while it does last longer, it's not an 100% stun. So that's kind of bad. Again, it's just because of a rounding issue. Most of the time you can use the Mesmerize and you'll get a 1-turn stun, but occasionally you get a 1-turn, 2-turn potential stun, which is very bad. You don't want to have that variability, unknown factor. You can use it twice per turn, but the other bad thing about it is that it has a plus 20 save. So the monster gets a bonus to save, but it is quick cast, as I was saying. So you can put on a potency misc, you can put on a potency shield, pet, etc. So you can still have a pretty good chance to inflict, but it would be nice if it wasn't a plus 20 save. So that makes it kind of bad. The next thing that is a useful vampire ability are these bats. And you'll notice they look the same as the Werepyre Bats. That is just they just look like that. They are different guests. What they do is they inflict some blind, some element vulnerability, and some bleed. So if you look, the bleed, it was already bleeding, so we can't determine the power, but they inflict 9% bonus damage, a 4 blind per hit, so if they hit all 3 hits, a minus 12 blind, and a slight bleed, a 0.3 bleed. I know that from the information. I know it says 0.7, but again, that's because we already had a slight bleed on the monster. It's kind of bad because it's split between 3 statuses. None of the statuses are that strong. That being said, we have very few bleed guests, and this guest does do bleed in 4 different elements if you have the 4 different armors, or 5 if you have the Z token armor as well. So it's not useless, but it's pretty bad. The next ability is Vampire's healing spell. So as you can see, it's called Mist Form. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, vampires can turn into mist. And what it does is it gives you 20 blocking, and it heals you for half of a normal healing spell. Now, what's cool is you can take the 20 blocking to another armor, and it lasts for 3 rounds. So you can use it in the vampire armor, and then keep the blocking boost in something else, like a dodge armor, like the ghost armor, for example. It's not great, because usually you can either spend your resources on a defense spell or on a healing spell, not on one that's combined. That being said, it's got uses. It's got uses. I wouldn't take the armor just for this. I think it's pretty bad. But it's not a useless ability. So we've already been over the intellect booster, which is the level 7 ability, or excuse me, the level 8 ability. One thing that you get also, instead of the passive HP heal that Werewolf gets, you get a passive MP heal. You heal like 25 mana per turn. Kind of ass. That's all there is to say. It's kind of ass, to be honest. Like 25 mana, You're not going to feel that even in like a 10-turn fight. Nightfall is the nuke that vampires get at their level 9 ability. So again, all 3 subraces have a level 9 nuke. Nightfall is counted as a spell. It's about as strong as the werewolf one and is weaker than the Werepyre level 9 ability. It does dark damage and the other 4 elements of the other 4 armors. It doesn't seek between dark and wind, it just does dark damage. Finally, the last thing that sets Vampire apart, and not necessarily in a good way, but it makes it different, is your evolve ability. And now this is the beast form, and I'll just show you. See that healing I got? First of all, I'm using a blood blade, so I lost some HP and then healed it back. But basically, what Vampire's beast form does is it trades, well, part of the healing is from the bleed too. But what it does is it trades damage for healing. So you do 7/8 of the damage of a werewolf beast form, and you heal for 1/8 of that damage. So if you're boosting your attacks with either Dunamis if you're melee, Essence of Carnage if you're free to play melee, or Polala or something if you're a mage, you can do a lot of damage and then heal a lot from it. So the heal is based off damage, which is strong. That being said, it's a lifesteal effect. Most lifesteal effects in AQ aren't that great. This one is no exception. So what does Vampire give that the other subraces don't? It gives both intellect and charisma in the stat drives. Those are 2 stats that I, as a mage player, am always looking to get more of. That's good on its own. Everything else, the bleed healing, it's really good sustain. If you're a bleed stacking build, the beast form can be used as like a sustain to like out heal bosses, and like it's expensive though. Big trade-offs. The control is okay as a free-to-play stun, but it does have a plus 20 save, so you need some potency to back it up. The guests, they're not good. They are a bleed guest, and we have so few of those, but they're not good. I would say if you're a mage, you're really choosing between werewolf or vampire or werepyre most of the time. And werepyre has some cooler effects with some slightly lower stats, whereas vampire has just like basic stats, basic damage, basic boosting, compared to werepyre's like bleed, which you can then use for other stuff, or compared to werepyre's sustaining with guests. So if you want to be a simplistic mage, vampire is probably better than that. If you want to get into some more complicated strategies, Werepyre has a lot to offer you. I would only recommend Werewolf for mages if you're specifically going to use the Eat Fear or Eat Bleed on Necro in combination with it. Aside from that, I would not recommend it for mages. Now, I've sort of been talking about builds now these last couple minutes. I want to go over a quick summary of how subraces should be viewed as builds. Now, there's also Neko. I'm ignoring Neko for now because those are like Ranger and Beastmaster subraces, so they're kind of separate from Darkovia. Werepyre, if you have the stats for it, is the best subrace. It has higher numbers, higher damage numbers, higher healing numbers, a better guest, better passive abilities. It's just better if you have the stats for it. If you don't have the stats for it, Vampire is a perfectly good option for mages. The beast form has a spell boost, the beast form has good sustain, it does help with your mana restoration a little bit, it does help with your SP versus mana management because its stat toggles are MP instead of SP. It's got some stuff going for it. It has a good free-to-play stun, even though it has a plus 20 save. It's good for free-to-play. Werewolf has almost nothing going for it. It's a pure damage option for any build. For warriors or rangers, you can boost your strength or dexterity. Aside from that, the only good thing is the fear for fear eating and the bleed for bleed eating. Werepyre does the bleed better, but doesn't have a fear. You can only use Werepyre if you have intellect. The other 2 subraces, you can use them if you have any stat. So you could be a warrior using Vampire as a melee attacking option, just because you like the lifesteal effect, even though you don't get the stat bonuses. You could be a mage using Werewolf to get the fear to use for fear eating. that's pretty much my summary. I hope that you can make an informed decision on what subrace to do. And keep in mind, once you have a good setup going, you can do the cure quests and train up the other subraces pretty quickly. I did all of this in about an hour. Admittedly, I'd already trained the subraces and done the advanced quests. But you know, it's not a huge process. It's not a huge commitment. If you think, vampire looks pretty fun, I'm gonna try it, and you try it for 2 or 3 days, you give it up on it, and you train Werepyre, it doesn't take too long. So subraces aren't a commitment. I recommend trying them out if you're not sure what you like, and I hope that all the information in this video is informative and helps you make a good decision. So thank you for watching. Please leave any thoughts, disagreements, questions in the comments. And I hope you have a great day. Peace and love, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.